There is a name that was printed on the official team sheet for the 1998 World Cup final, crossed out, and then printed again, all within the space of 2 hours. Nobody in charge ever gave a satisfying explanation for what happened in between. More than 1 billion people tuned in to watch that final, and the man they most wanted to see should not have been on that pitch at all. What they witnessed that night was not a football match. It was a human being playing the most important game of his life in a state of complete psychological and physical collapse. To understand how the greatest footballer on earth ended up broken and silent on the biggest stage in sport, you had to go back to a neighborhood in Rio de Janeiro where hope was not something people talked about out loud. Bento Ribeiro was not the kind of place that produced footballers who played in World Cup finals. It was the kind of place that swallowed dreams before they had a chance to breathe. His father was a factory worker who loved football but could never afford boots for his son. So the boy learned to play without them, barefoot on concrete, until his feet bled and then hardened into something extraordinary. What made him different was not just talent. Every favela in Brazil had talent. What made him different was a terrifying seriousness, a refusal to let the weight of where he came from crush what he believed he could become. By the time he was 13, he had been rejected by a local club because they said he was too thin, too fragile, a child who looked like the game might break him in half before he had a chance to show what he could do. He kept playing. He played in streets, in parks, in futsal courts where the speed of the game forced his feet to become something beyond natural. Every rejection became fuel and every closed door made him more certain of what lay on the other side. The story of how he rose from those concrete courts to the grandest stages in world football is one of the most remarkable in the history of the game, and if you want to keep hearing the stories that the history books leave out, following this channel is the best decision you will make today. He was 17 when a major Brazilian club finally gave him a real contract. His first professional season was enough to make scouts across Europe go quiet and then reach immediately for the telephone. He arrived in Europe as a teenager carrying an impossible weight of expectation, signed to a club in the Netherlands that believed they had found something the world had never quite seen before. They were right, but they would not be able to keep him for long. His time at that Dutch club lasted only a single season, but it sent a thunderclap through world football. 34 goals in 33 appearances that made every club in Europe desperate and every defender in the continent quietly terrified. Barcelona paid a world record fee to bring him to Spain, and the Nou Camp fell in love before he had even laced his boots for the first time. What followed was a season that old supporters still describe in reverent whispers. He won the FIFA World Player of the Year award at the age of 19, the youngest in history at that time, and he received it not with arrogance but with an almost childlike disbelief, as if the boy from Bento Ribeiro was still watching from somewhere inside and could not quite believe what he was seeing. But then came the move that would define and ultimately torment him. Inter Milan paid a second world record fee to take him to Italy, into the hands of a club with ambitions as enormous as his talent and a commercial machine that had already begun to see him less as a man and more as a product. In his first season in Italy, the knee injuries began. Small at first, enough to keep him out for a few weeks, the kind of thing that is easy to explain away as bad luck. But the body was sending signals that the machine around him had no interest in receiving. And yet for all that, in the summer of 1998, he arrived at the World Cup in France as the most dangerous footballer on the planet. Brazil were favorites. He was their heartbeat. The tournament was supposed to be his coronation. He had been extraordinary throughout the group stage and knockout rounds, the kind of player who made trained professionals stop and stare during warm-ups. France was building toward a moment that everyone could feel was coming. On the morning of the final, everything felt right. Brazil felt ready. He felt ready. The world felt ready. And then, sometime in the early evening of July 12, he was found on the floor of his hotel room shaking violently, unable to speak. His teammates watched in silence as a doctor was called. The seizure lasted more than a minute. When it stopped, he lay still on the floor and stared at the ceiling with eyes that looked as though they were looking at something far away from a hotel room in Paris. He was taken to a clinic. Initial reports said he would not play. The team sheet that was submitted to FIFA showed his name absent. And then, 2 hours before kickoff, something changed and nobody in authority has ever fully explained what. The whisper that has followed this story for more than 2 decades is that a commercial sponsor with enormous financial leverage over Brazilian football made clear that the world had not tuned in to watch a replacement striker. They had tuned in to watch him. He played 90 minutes in a World Cup final 36 hours after a seizure that had left his teammates afraid he might not wake up. He touched the ball. He ran. He tried. But the light behind his eyes was not the same light. Brazil lost the final 3-0 to the host nation. A team that had been considered almost unbeatable was dismantled with ease. And the man who was supposed to be untouchable wandered the pitch like someone searching for a version of himself he could not find. The aftermath brought no answers, only more questions. The official medical report was vague. The Brazilian Football Confederation offered nothing. His sponsor remained silent. And the player himself, in interviews over the years, has given different accounts that never quite align. What happened next, however, is the part of his story that demands to be told with the reverence it deserves. Because most men would have let that night define them. He refused. The knee injuries that followed nearly ended his career entirely. He missed almost 2 full years of football. There were surgeons who quietly told people close to him that they were not sure he would ever play again at the highest level. But at the 2002 World Cup in Japan and South Korea, he returned. He did not just return. He scored 8 goals including 2 in the final, won the Golden Boot, and lifted the trophy with his country. The boy from Bento Ribeiro had written the ending himself. The 1998 final remains one of football history's great open wounds. The questions about what really happened that night in the hotel, who made the call to put him on that pitch, and whether his long-term health was sacrificed for commercial interests, have never been satisfactorily answered. What is certain is that he was the greatest footballer of his era and one of the most complete strikers the game has ever produced. What is also certain is that the world asked too much of him on the one night that should have been entirely his own. The full truth of that night may never surface. But his story, from a barefoot child on a concrete alley in Rio to the man who climbed back from the edge of oblivion to hold the World Cup above his head, is a truth that football will never stop needing to hear. And if stories like this one matter to you, following Football Untold means you will never miss the history that the headlines forgot.